Hi, good morning. It's 9 o'clock. We had a 7:30 appointment this morning, so I couldn't jump on here at our normal time. Sorry about that. And there's going to be 2 other days here this week that I'll be on at 7 instead of 7:30. So I'll put a note in about that Thursday and Friday. We haven't been on for a week. Can you believe that? But Zechariah was really a lot of information for me to pour through before we could get going in it. And I'm sorry for the delay, but uh, it couldn't be helped. With the other books, they were short enough that I could get into them, in just a couple of days. But this one was, let me
in
just,
just a couple of days.
let me just,
But this one was,
let me
in
just,
just a couple of days.
let me just,
But this one was,
sorry about that. I was trying to pin the post, but it wasn't going to work, so sorry for the echo. Anyway, I couldn't get through all 14 chapters and the very long introduction in just a couple of days. It took me a while. And then I read through the notes, and I'm just kind of sitting in it. It took me a week. Sorry about that. But here we are, and it is our 71st day of doing this devotional, and we started back in October, I think October, and it's February 24th, 2025. Tomorrow is my first daughter's birthday. We've just celebrated my youngest daughter's birthday last week along with my sister Gail, and we're going to go to dinner tonight for Phoebe, and it's just a fun week, fun time. So, Zechariah, what have you all been up to this week? Let me just take a drink here. Just enough to fog up my glasses. All right, I could go on and on about what I've been up to because it's been such a busy week. This morning was the orthodontist. First time ever. It's looking like Penny needs braces. I don't know if any of you have ever had to put braces on, but yeah, we think we might have to do that. So anyway, so we're on page 363, and this is the introduction to Zechariah. This will be part 1, and so we're going to read from the book. If you don't know what we're doing, we've been in this book, The Minor Prophets, the Passion Translation, for about this is the 4th month, and we probably have about 3 weeks more in the book, maybe a full month, and we'll be done. Wow. So good for you, those of you that have been going through this whole time. I have to tell you, Zechariah is pretty potent. It is some amazing messianic prophecy here. There are some jewels in here, gems, and I was just so encouraged reading this. There's 8 visions that he has. That's a lot. So anyway, let's get going here. We read through the introduction, and if you have your book, you can read along with us, or you can just listen. It's going to take us 2 days to get through the introduction. It's quite long, and then we'll be in chapter 1, I believe, on Wednesday morning. All right, Zechariah the prophet. Those living, that's the author, and the audience is those living in the aftermath of a partially failed revival of Israelite culture after the Babylonian exile. The date is 520 to 518 BC. Type of literature: prophetic, prose, oracles, and apocalyptic literature. Really a lot of stuff in here about the times we're living in, the end times. And the major themes are Yahweh as commander of angel armies, the day of Yahweh, angelic revelation, God's communicating through visions, the prophet as custodian of the covenant. Wow, how would you like to be the custodian of the covenant? We actually are in a new covenant, and we get to be the keepers of that covenant. Promises of restoration and renewal, blessing for Israel and the nations, and then lastly, as usual, seeing Jesus in this particular book. Finding Jesus in each of these minor prophets has been so exciting and so fun. Next, we have the outline, and the outline is something I normally don't read, except that I'll draw your attention to on page 364, part 3 is the coming of the Messianic King. It's all about Jesus. And even in part 3, there's a subpart A and subpart B. Under B, Roman numeral 2, there's a prophecy of national mourning for the pierced one. And I tell you, when I got to that point and realized that Zechariah was talking about the pierced one, who is of course Jesus, and how he was pierced for our transgressions, years and years ahead of time when he prophesied this, I just get so moved. And anyway, that's the outline. Now we're going to jump over to 365, and it's about the book of Zechariah. Good morning, Amy. And Zechariah is one of the longer books of the 12, the minor prophets. It is 14 chapters. It's one of the most difficult books of the Bible to translate and interpret. Hebrew as a spoken language was starting to die and be replaced by Aramaic, the language of the Babylonian conquerors. The exiles were back in Judah, their homeland, having returned from captivity in Babylon some 20 years previously, 538 BC. The last sands of the 70 years of exile predicted by Jeremiah had dropped through to the pile at the bottom of the hourglass. Wow. In this exciting season, listen to this, the prophets Zechariah and Haggai that we just finished were encouraging the people to rebuild the temple and restart the Israelite civilization. This revitalization of Israel would come to be known as Second Temple Judaism and was the era and culture in which Jesus grew up. Wow, so we're getting close to the time of Christ. Closer. It's amazing. The potent and fiery Old Testament prophetic tradition, unique to Israel, was entering its twilight years, and the season of rabbinic sages and apocalyptic visions was dawning. It was a new era, like we're living in now. We're living in a new era in Christ. And this fault line runs through the book of Zechariah, which, along with Daniel, expresses the birth of revelatory apocalyptic language. The book may be divided into two distinct but related parts. The first section is chapter 1 through 8, which incorporate night visions along with additional revelatory words of Yahweh. Together, these convey themes of hope, rebuke, restoration, and renewal. The second section in chapters 9 through 14, containing two prophetic oracles of distinctive apocalyptic language, conveying the primary themes of the divine destruction of the enemies of the people of God, the restoration and cleaning of the post-exilic community of Judah, and the coming of the Messianic priest king, along with the establishment of the universal everlasting kingdom of God. Zechariah's writing is highly cinematic and visual, with the first 8 chapters of his book chronicling the 8 night visions he experienced. As is often the case with such visions, including angels, we occasionally have trouble figuring out who is speaking to whom. The accounts for the plentiful variations among English versions of Zechariah, the literary narratives of such revelatory reveries, much like our own dreams, are distinctly nonlinear. It's a book of high hopes for an Israelite renaissance, which merges with a prophetic anticipation of the political, cultural, and social turmoil that will erupt in the post-exilic community of God's people in the centuries leading up to the dominance of the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. This is highlighted, for example, in chapters 11 and 12. The anticipated pain of this future trauma is mixed with stubborn hope, sublimated into the prophetic oracles and apocalyptic visions splashing forth in the final chapters. These are oracles that also anticipate the coming of Jesus Christ, the Messianic King, and the fulfillment of the hope promised to the people of God. If Yahweh, whose promises always prevail, did not awaken the soul of Israel in Zechariah's time, then he would certainly do so at some moment in the future. Zechariah, in his very heart and soul, was compelled to process a depressing shift in Israelite society. In the former classical era of David, Solomon, and their descendants, independent Israel had a stable separation of three powers: kings, priests, and prophets. At the beginning of the book, Zechariah hoped to restore this trinity by naming Zerubbabel, who was the political person, and Joshua, who was the priestly person, as the heirs of Moses and Aaron. However, the prophetic voice was no longer resonating with the people, and Zerubbabel was unable to assert any real political power in the shadow of the mighty Persian Empire. Relegated to the weaker role of county commissioner, he faded from the scene. Of the three pillars of Israelite culture, only the priestly one survived. The prophetic and royal branches evaporated before Zechariah's eyes. That must have just been horrible. However, notwithstanding the contemporary discouragement, all 8 visions granted to the prophet Zechariah in chapters 1 through 6 it reinforced the hope provided in the divine revelation of God's redemptive program. The civil and religious roles played out by Zerubbabel and Joshua in Zechariah's day will be fulfilled in the crowning of the ultimate messianic priest king, that is Jesus. Most scholars and most Jewish, Childs, Lasor, Baldwin, Klein, and most Jewish scholars believe that the book of Zechariah is one cohesive unit. Others believe that some form of the last part of the book was added later. Given the heart-rending unified plot of the book, it makes little sense to divide it. Okay, so now just so you know where we are, we're on page 367 and we're going to read about the purpose of the book. In its final form, the book of Zechariah lays out the backstory of the failure of post-exilic Israel to reclaim the glory of David, Solomon, and the original temple, and reveals why that fumbled ambition had to be transposed into a new hope for a messianic age to come. The promises of God and the faith heritage of Israel were simply too rich to abandon. The purpose of this book is much the same as that of Haggai, which was authored by Zechariah's contemporary. Thus, Zechariah laid out a future hope for God's people throughout his prophecy. The 8 night visions and accompanying revelations, along with the prophetic oracles in the second half of the book, reveal truly encouraging details of the hope that God clearly intended his discouraged people to understand and hold on to. God's intention to have his temple in Jerusalem rebuilt in order to house his glorious return. His people will be fully restored to their homeland. They will be cleansed from all their sins, and be granted a renewed prosperity. They will also ultimately enjoy a God-given peace, which, is that which or with? With their enemies destroyed by the hand of their sovereign Lord. Oh, with their enemies, they're going to have this peace. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't read that right. And in the end, the arrival of the messianic priestly shepherd king, I love that, I'm going to underline that. The messianic priestly shepherd king, wow, will terminate the succession of corrupt and wicked shepherd rulers as he ushers in a kingdom of never-ending glory and righteousness. And boy, we are seeing, unfortunately, wicked shepherd rulers, and it really speaks of the times that we're living in. Underlying Zechariah's message, as his name indicates, is the foundation of the divine plan of redemption. He wanted to remind the people of God that Yahweh remembers his covenant promises. God has not forgotten his people then, and he's not forgotten us now. I love that. God is a keeper of his word. That is something that we need to just be so surely founded upon. He is our rock. He is true. He is the truth. And he can't lie, and he will never forget about us. It's an impossibility. So he didn't, even though there were periods of great silence, God did not forget, because it's impossible for him as God to forget. And he won't forget us now, just like he couldn't forget his people then. This is a cup that my friend Christine gave to my daughter. I think it was for her graduation. And it says, it's so pretty. I had to take the lid off though because it's so hot. You are beautiful, victorious, enough, strong. You are never alone. You are amazing, capable, chosen, created, and always loved. It's like an affirmation cup with the scripture references, and it's so beautiful. And I'm drinking from it instead of Penny today. All right, because I left mine at church yesterday. I left it underneath the seat, and hopefully it'll be there when I go look for it in a few days. All right, so now we're on the section of the author and audience. Zechariah, like Ezekiel, was more of a priest who operated prophetically than the other way around. So he was a priest who operated in the gift of the prophetic gifting. He was not a prophet per se, first of all. Hebrew names are more than just labels, and Zechariah's name means Yahweh remembers. What a beautiful honoring name to have, that God remembers. There are over 24 men in the Bible with that name. Wow. Wow, there's 24 men in the Bible alone with the name Zechariah. How do we keep all that straight? Most likely, this Zechariah was born among the Israelite exiles during their captivity in Babylon. After the Persians destroyed Babylon, they set these exiles free, and Zechariah returned to Jerusalem with a wave of them, eager to lay eyes on the homeland that they'd never seen. These returned exiles were his audience. He came from a priestly family. His father, Berechiah, may have died when Zechariah was young. So it seems Zechariah was raised and adopted by his grandfather, Iddo. Iddo was a priest. Wow. So Zechariah was born a priest with the heart of a prophet, much like Ezekiel and John the Baptist. So he had the heart of a prophet. He spoke the truth, and he was born a priest like his father. Zechariah and Haggai were contemporaries, with Haggai likely much older than the younger Zechariah. According to Haggai 1:1, Haggai's ministry began on the first day of the 6th month of the 2nd year of Darius, and Zechariah's prophetic ministry began roughly 2 months later in the same year. Zechariah dated his night visions on the 24th day of the 11th month of Darius's 2nd year. Okay, so now we get to the themes of the book of Zechariah. There are major themes in every book, and the first one here is Yahweh as commander of angel armies. Zechariah used the phrase Yahweh, commander of angel armies, or Yahweh Zebaoth, an astounding 47 times in this 14 chapters. Wow. This title was often translated Lord of Hosts. So if you read this in the King James, you'll see the words Lord of Hosts, but the Passion Translation likes to turn that into Commander of Angel Armies. The hosts are the angels. If you heavenly hosts, you've heard of that before, and the Lord would be what he means by commander. So that's how they came up with Commander of Angel Armies. I love it so much. Either way, it's amazing to think about him telling all the angels what to do. And for them to not be these wispy cherubim that we have, pictured in paintings, but to actually see them as, belted up, ready to move with the sword of the Lord, just going after whatever he's asking them to do, as an incredibly unified army in the heavens. This title was often translated Lord of Hosts in older English usage, back when our word hosts was more commonly applied to military legions rather than hospitality directors. That's funny. A Zaba or Tsaba is an army of soldiers, and Zebaoth or Tsebaot is the plural form. The extensive use of this title in the book of Zechariah underscores the predominant motive of the all-powerful sovereign Lord of the universe as the heavenly commander of innumerable angelic warriors. Can you get that picture? Man, it's like all power, sovereign Lord, creator of the universe, is the commander-in-chief, like what we call our president. And he's commanding an innumerable number of angelic warriors. And they're warriors. They're not, playing harps on a cloud. Such an omnipotent force is irresistible and indestructible. They're irresistible and indestructible. And it emphasizes the reality that throughout history, the present and the future, the enemies of God and his people will never be able to prevail against such an opponent. There is no way that the enemy of God can prevail against these angelic hosts. He wins. Period. We know the end of the story. He wins. We win because we're with him. All right, the second major theme is the day of Yahweh, and Zechariah referred to the day of Yahweh over 20 times in this prophetic work. Most commonly, he referred to events that will happen on that day. And these references bring out two contrasting emphases, one positive and one negative. So here we go again. We're going to understand the day of Yahweh this is going to be the 10th or 11th time, because we're almost done with the 12 books. For the enemies of God and his people, such a day portends an ominous, catastrophic destruction. For then they will face the terrible wrath of the living God. So on the one hand, the day of the Lord means that there will be catastrophic destruction for those who do not know the Lord. However, for the people of God, the ultimate day of Yahweh will be one of unimaginable peace and joy. For in that day, God will be victorious over all of his enemies and fulfill his plan of redemption and renewal for all of eternity, forever. It's over at that point. But it must also be recognized that throughout the history of the Israelite people, they also suffered a day of Yahweh punishment for their sin, although such a judgment was temporary, never absolute. That terrible latter destiny is reserved for the unrepentant enemies of God. And so on that day, Yahweh, commander of angel armies, will execute justice, destroy wickedness, vindicate the faithful and remnant and set everything right. You know, when you hear about, I'm not going to get this wrong because I didn't pay enough attention to it, but I'll just bring it up as an example. I think it was 70 people who were beheaded in the Congo last month for just believing in Jesus. And I think about how can that still be happening? And it is. And it says here that he will vindicate the faithful remnant. There is a special place actually in heaven for those who have been murdered and who are, I'm not remembering the word, martyred for their faith. And those people will be shining in heaven, and it's still, and it is a big deal. God will make a big deal out of it. But they deserve justice, and they will get it from the Lord himself. He will set everything right. In New Testament terms, his kingdom is coming. His will shall be done on earth as it is in heaven. Heaven is literally and inevitably invading earth. Let's think about that for a minute. Heaven is literally and inevitably, it's inevitable. It is invading earth. And all of that is accomplished solely on the basis of the finished work of salvation in the person of Jesus Christ, person and work of Jesus Christ, who is God's Son and who is our Messianic King of Kings. This theme of the day of Yahweh is one that is consistently found throughout the Old Testament, incorporated particularly in the canonical prophets, both major and minor. All right, the next major theme is angelic revelation, and this is really cool, all the visions and all the angelic visitation in this book. Throughout the Old Testament, certain concepts like angels, eschatology, and the afterlife gradually come into greater prominence and clarity over time. Revelatory angels prominently though not exclusively found in Daniel and Zechariah, play a significant role in the increasingly frequent genre of prophetic apocalyptic literature that began to emerge from the 500s BC onward. The book of Revelation is by far the best example of New Covenant, New Testament biblical apocalyptic literature. In Zechariah, there are two different kinds of angelic beings involved in communicating divine revelation to the prophet via the 8 visions recounted in chapters 1 through 6. One is referred to simply as the angel who was talking to me, and commentators generally refer to him as the interpreting angel. For that is precisely his task, to explain to the prophet the meaning of the visions he is experiencing. The other angel is a manifestation of God himself, designated here and elsewhere in the Old Testament as the angel of Yahweh. He's explicitly mentioned in chapters 1 and 3. Elsewhere, the single term angel is likely to indicate this divine figure, as in chapters 2 and 3. Then the reference in chapter 2, verse 1, listen to this, is to a man with a measuring line. And it's almost certainly to be the angel of Yahweh, or God himself. The figure is uniformly understood throughout the Old Testament as a manifestation of God in human form, commonly referred to as a theophany, because mortal eyes may never view the essential being of God himself. We can't handle it in our mortality. The visible presence to individuals chosen to receive divine revelation is most often, but not always, via the manifestation of such an angelic being. So he sent his angel representative of himself instead of himself coming, because it would have been a little much for them to endure in their bodies, their mortal bodies, for any of us to. Okay, so that's where we have to stop for today. There's about maybe three more themes, and then some other things that we need to read about, especially seeing Jesus in the book in the introduction. So that will take care of tomorrow on Tuesday morning at our normal time at 7:30. And I'm so glad that we're back together after our kind of long break there. I hope that you all got caught up. Penny and I spent 3 days over this last weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We don't watch a lot of movies. This isn't our norm at all, but we got on this kick of watching movies from characters of the Old Testament. And they were old movies made in the 60s. And sorry, I'm trying to take a vitamin. That didn't go down. My drink is still too hot. But it was really fun. The first day on Friday, which was her birthday, we watched a movie about they were 3 hours long. We watched a movie about Joseph. I learned so much in that movie. And then, all of them I did, but that really spoke to me. And then the second day, we watched another 3-hour movie on the life of Moses, which was, oh my goodness, so much of the Bible covered. And sorry, these pills are big. Ugh. Sorry. Anyway, and then yesterday we watched a movie which wasn't as long, it was just 2 hours, but they're still long, and that one was on the life of Ruth. That was was made like when I was just 5 years old or something. It's really back when it's kind of funny to see how they created the sets and everything, but that one wasn't as true to the Bible as maybe the other two were. First one was really accurate. But then I thought about The Chosen and how they take liberties as well to tell the story. But anyway, that was a fun thing to do. Hi, Lori, I see you on there. And so yeah, that was fun this weekend. I hope you guys had a good weekend. And I'll see you tomorrow for the rest of the introduction. Bye-bye.